Yo-ho! I'm Joe, here with me is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
And we've got another anime review for you all. I'm going to put this under Seinen because this is a little more adult than Shonen. And so it's a little deeper than any Shonen that came after probably the early 90s. Because most Shonen after that point are just, I would argue, for like 5-year-olds. Not all, but most. Like some, like Yu-Gi-Oh! Are actually mature. But then you get Naruto and others which are just... No, I wouldn't even show a 2-year-old that. But this is a deep, and very beautiful, and very Japanese piece of work. This is an anime that is inspired by the first novel in history. And it is a profoundly beautiful and deep piece of work that I've had the pleasure of reading quite a bit of over the years, quite a few times. And it is a novel that is about, I would argue, in a way, the human condition. But the main character is Genji, or Hikaru Genji, the Shining Prince, Genji no Kimi. And it is basically his life story from the moment he's born to maybe a bit before he's born up to and after his death when his kids are running around. And then it ends around chapter 54 with Genji, I think, dying around 42 or chapter 44. And the thing is, it's a psychological thriller, horror, romance novel. And it's a very difficult piece to put into any genre. It's just a very peculiar piece of work. I don't say that as a criticism, I say that as a compliment. It is a very complex novel. And it is one that was written by Shikibu Murasaki 1,000 years ago. And the thing is, it's pretty much the 1,000th anniversary of her death next year. So the Japanese are basically kind of doing a lot of stuff to celebrate that. Now, this anime, though, was made in 2011, I believe. 2010, 2011. So it is based off a manga that was made, which had beautiful art, that was made to honor the original novel. And the thing about the novel is that each of the chapters is one different love story almost. And it progresses through Genji's life from a young boy to a young cad who makes Barney Stinson look pretty chaste to, a mature young man hungering for love and family to a broken old man to, his kids now following and continuing the cycle of suffering and life. But there's a lot more than just that. It's difficult to describe. It is a beautiful story. And it's one I would like us to do a book club of down the road. But the first 3 chapters, I think I did the audiobook reading on this channel, so you can check those out. I might put in the same playlist our book club when the time comes. I'm just wanting to wait a few months for that. But when it comes to the anime, it starts off in Genji's childhood, sort of. First off, we see him having a love affair where his lover begs him to come back soon because she's hopelessly in love with him. Genji smiles and says, all right, I'll come as soon as I can. Then later says, send a really nice gift to her, Koremitsu. He doesn't know what the gift is going to be. He says, make it more extravagant than the last. And then says, I don't think I'm going to visit anytime soon. Which seems really cold.
And in some ways very cruel.
It is very cruel.
And at least tell her, no, I can't return.
But he doesn't want other men to sleep with her.
It's like, That's toying with her feelings
Yeah,
and not considering what's best for her.
yeah, because it's one of the. There's a Japanese belief that one of the worst things you can do to a woman is to toy with her feelings and make her cry. And this is an old idea that's derived from, well, chivalry in a way, and also from, to an extent, the Japanese concept of such things. I would say Bushido, but this is something that I think came more with modernity into Japanese culture, probably after the Meiji Restoration. Maybe a bit before that, I guess. It's possible. I'm not willing to put a date on it because we're not sure. But arguably, well, actually, it might actually stem from Bushido, now that I think about it, because I just remembered, in Heike Monogatari, there's a lot of statements stated about the cruelty that men show towards their mistresses, and how a lot of men who make them cry are being cruel, but those men who try to do everything they could to keep their mistresses or wives from crying are good men. So I guess there's always been this concept in a way in Japanese culture. And Genji is showing himself to be a cad, and he's not being a very nice guy. On the other hand, we then get him reflecting on his childhood, and we find out his childhood was terrible. By the time he was 9, he had suffered a great deal. But he was still a child who liked to play, but the thing is, his many traumas left him reclusive, solitary, and a bit of a lone wolf. He just didn't like the company of anyone whatsoever, except maybe his father and the odd woman of the court. So he just was always alone. And you get the sense of a child who's cut off from the world. And I would argue perhaps the kindest thing someone could do is not to give him a new mother figure, but maybe a new father figure or something. Like, you know what I mean? Like a male protector, male mentor. Since the emperor can't be there all the time, he probably should have assigned him a guard to watch over him and kind of take up a bit of the uncle or fatherly role. But Genji never had that paternal influence. So he's adrift. At 9 years old, he's adrift. And he ends up always playing around outside, whether it's in the snow or in the summertime, in Heian-kyo, that is to say, the ancient Kyoto. And the emperor decides that his boy has suffered so much, and the fact that his wife died left him longing for her because he was still in love with her. So he was kind of not really able to protect his son because he was too busy crying and grieving for his dead wife, which I should judge, but I actually kind of pity the emperor. So he decides to remarry, but he hears of a woman who looks exactly like his first wife. I say his first wife, but actually his second one, because he's already married to another woman. But this is like the woman he loved. So he decides to marry her. She's 14, and apparently he decides that she's just going to basically play mommy figure and big sister to his son, and leaves it at that. The anime makes it very clear he's not slept with her, and he's just simply married her, mostly for his son's sake, thinking this will be good for his son. But it's also a bit of him longing for his old wife, the lady Kibitsubo. So this entire scenario is really tragic. So the son, for his part, has fallen in love at first sight with her. Fujitsubo, this new woman in his father's life, has clearly become quite taken with Genji from the first time she looks at him, and the father's kind of in the way. But the father, when he sees the two, her telling stories to Genji, pulling out old scrolls with paintings on them, thinks, it seems, good. My family's whole. My son has a maternal figure. Now, his other sons have mothers, but this one doesn't. So he did this for his youngest. not realizing the suffering he's just thrust upon them. So the father's completely blameless, but it's just tragic. And Fujitsubo, for her part, tries to fit into this platonic love-based relationship that is supposed to be between her and her stepson. But who you trying to fool, lady? And on top of that, Genji becomes so taken with her, he decides to race off in the dead of winter to find the first blossoming flowers. And the thing is, how shall I put it? He falls into the water below the ice. He's pulled out, but he nearly dies because that's not good for you. And then Fujitsubo, who ends up nursing him back to health, is stunned that he was trying to find the first flowers of spring for her. And so she starts to have an inkling that the boy may not actually look on her as one would a mother or a big sister. She tries to insist that this is their relationship, then he kisses her. This is later in the next scene. And he says, "You are neither my mother nor my sister." At which point she banishes him from her presence, rejecting him completely, because he's 9. Like, she may really like him, but she doesn't see him as a man. But then as he's growing older, he's becoming better looking. It gets harder and harder for her. At 12, he has his genpuku, that is to say, his hair cutting ceremony, and he gets his first pair of pants, which I know there's going to be weird comments, but historically this was actually a grand event, and it signaled your transformation from boy to man. It's much like the Romans, who had their own type of ceremony like this at 15 years old. You have achieved manhood. It's only in modern times, with modern governments doing everything in their power to keep men boys until their 30s or 40s, that this sort of thing is unusual, has become an unusual thing to think about. But back then, boys became men at about between 12 and 15. Women became women at 16. So, go figure. Genji has his genpuku, is soon married off to Aoi no Ue, although that's not yet been shown. And Aoi no Ue was 16 years old, I believe. So that would make her about 6 years older than him. Actually, as you'll see in this anime, wow, is she beautiful. But the thing is, Genji isn't really happy with his genpuku. He then goes off to visit Fujitsubo no Ue, and all the doors to his previous maternal figures have been closed to him, because he's now a man, he's not allowed to see them. And then he tries to see Fujitsubo, who rejects him and refuses to even talk to him. And she breaks down crying, trying to convince herself, because she could see him, he could not see her. And she's trying to convince herself this is for the best. And he leaves after begging her to let him see her. Then we fast forward to about a dozen years later, when he's a full-grown man, and Tono Chujo, Genji's best friend, is taking note that his friend has a very cold and lonely look in his eyes. He's not a happy young camper, and he has endured a lot of suffering. And Tono Chujo pokes a little fun at it. Genji, though, just smiles and looks away into the distance, thinking about his past and the woman who was his first love. That's the first episode. What are your thoughts?
It is a very complicated situation, because I can't blame Genji's stepmother. She is in a tough situation because she's married to the emperor, and she can't just reciprocate the feelings of the son.
Especially in the legitimate son.
Exactly. And him confessing his love, not as a son, not as a little brother,
But as a man.
but as a man, she can't just,
Yeah, no wonder she was confused and scared. Because that could be her head on a chopping block and his. So she runs almost screaming the other way. That's actually what she's supposed to do. But then, as he becomes a man, it seems that her view of him starts to change. And she becomes very conscious in that last scene of him as a man. Which, if he had not confessed his love at 9, and he suddenly came out at around 12 to 14 to her, do you think she would have rejected him?
I don't know. It is certainly complicated.
Yeah, the whole thing is one big mess. And the Emperor himself isn't innocent in all this. He has no idea. And he's clearly happy with his family, not realizing what's happening kind of behind his back. And it's just such a mess.
And it's as you said, having a man or a protector in to focus Genji's attention into more
Masculine arts.
He might have been able to get his mind off of the lady. And
Yeah. That said, this was his first child love. His first kind of... how do I put it? Like, we've all had our first loves as, like, 13-year-olds or something. I remember mine. That was quite embarrassing. And
indeed,
the thing is, it never goes well. But, well, okay, unless you're Tolkien, at which point you marry her when you're about 21. But, like, the rest of us, it's never fun. Genji's got way less fun with this first love than most men. But his next love is going to end even more bleakly and horribly. Poor kid. And that one's like, woof. Oof. Man, like, you poor guy. And that poor woman. Anyways. What did you think of the colors and the animation?
very beautiful.
Yeah. Do you think more anime should be made like this?
Yes. There's certainly a place for this style. And it should be employed far more.
And what do you think of the music? Like, I'm not talking the theme song. That one's terrible. But the background music. It really set the mood. It was beautiful.
Peaceful.
Except when it's sad.
Yes, and that is important.
It really feels Japanese. And there's something otherworldly. You're not stepping into the Japan of today. You're stepping into a Japan that's 1,000 years away. Like, of 1025. Or, like, at least from 1000 to 1025. This is a Japan that honestly was lost when the samurai took over, when Taira no Kiyomori mounted his coup d'etat in 1159. This Japan died, I would almost say, in flames at that point. Because afterwards you have the Genpei War, and that burns to the ground almost the last traces of this Japan. And if it didn't, then the wars that saw the end of the Kamakura and the beginning of the Ashikaga dynasty of shoguns, in which Japan transitioned from the rule of the Hojo clan to Ashikaga and the non-Bokucho period, which is to say the period of the North and Southern courts. Bloody period. horribly bloody, which saw parts of Kyoto burnt to the ground. That the Japan of Murasaki's era is gone at that point, like no matter what. So this is a Japan that, like, it doesn't exist anymore. And yet, watching this anime, it's like you're back in time. You're seeing, like, to all the samurai nuts, this is a Japan I don't think many of you could even imagine. It's very otherworldly. It is completely different. I would almost say that there's no conception for such a society anywhere else on Earth. It is it is so entirely and completely unique. And it is such a sequestered, strange world. And yet the samurai who were in the provinces, the Bushi, those half Amishi, half Japanese, Yamato Japanese people who would become the samurai, are there in the provinces. So the samurai are on their horizon, but in the capital city, the Japan of Heian-kyo, it is a very strange, almost alien place. And yet it's a place of great beauty. And it's a shame that it was just a blink in time. Like, it didn't even... Like, in the history of the cosmos, even of this planet, even of human history, it's just a blink of an eye. And it was over. In flames. I must emphasize that, because there was a lot of wars that followed. But the writing that is utilized here is primarily, when you look at Murasaki Shikibu's story, is a very interesting and very different one, both stylistically and in terms of perception of the world. Like, you read her book and you see her perspective. She sees into human nature as well as Homer and Shakespeare. But her point of view is decidedly feminine. And at the same time, there's no book like it. Her point of view and the perspective of these kind of aristocrats from her period of the Heian Shirai, before they were utterly effeminatized, which you got to bear in mind, the Fujiwara regents and many of the courtiers became very effeminate and unmasculine by the time of the Heike and the Minamoto. They're not yet like that. These guys are still capable of actually picking up a sword and a bow and arrow. And yet, they would prefer to pick up the brush. So, like, they're in this weird transition. And yet, there it is. So we have a window into a society that existed for maybe 200 years. And it is so peculiar. It is also very, very beautiful. And very, very fascinating. And I know people would say it was bloody. It actually wasn't. The Japanese of that era hated the shedding of blood. They were not yet a martial people. They were at one time, but then they drifted away from their martial nature. And they're drifting away in Murasaki Shikibu's period. So they're a very peaceful period, and that's why they couldn't last. Because then in came kind of the barbarians in the form of the samurai. But the samurai were to adopt a lot of the love of art and culture that these people did. So there's something fascinating here. And I know I'm waxing philosophical about this, but even you must have felt this is a very strange world. This is almost otherworldly to us. And yet human nature is human nature. And this is why I also want us to review this year's Taiga drama about Murasaki Shikibu, which, good choice, NHK. Like, kudos to them. Oh, it's going to be the 1000th birthday of Shikibu Murasaki. You have the series end just as, in the year she would die in. Very smart choice. And you look in there, and her dad's going out to grab a beer on occasion with his best friend. Guys do that all the time today. And he stresses because at one point in the show, he has no job. And he's like, how will I feed my family? And he's utterly ashamed. So they have the same worries we do today. Genji in this first episode has the same concerns for love and work and whatnot that we have today. And yet he's a cad who's using women. This is a very, very fascinating world. And this anime, in a lot of ways, is deeper than most others. Also in its art style. It's very interesting art style. So I would have to, if I had to rate this, like a 3.5.
3 3/4.
Yeah. This is a very special episode. But it gets even better. The horror elements come a little later. We're just on the build-up. Because when we get to the novel, you'll see that there's like 5-6 chapters of meandering. Because that's an older writing style. Older writers didn't just jump into the action. They took their time and slowly worked their way. They wanted you to know the characters before horrible things happen to them. Although with Murasaki Shikamaru, horrible things have already happened to Genji. So, yeah. But I've also been writing a spiritual successor to this story. And I was considering having Dan take a look at it later and see what he thinks of the first chapter. Although I'd want him to do that after he reads the first chapter of Genji. So we'll see. Anyways, don't forget to, if you enjoyed this video, smash that like and that subscribe button here so that we can build up towards 10 subs here on Radio Nippon. And also check out our Substack and subscribe over there for more updates of this sort, except in writing, as we run a blog and we tend to write a lot of web novels. So do check that out.